This is from Europe. It's the Great Food Reset. Now, listen to this. This is something that is in my book, The Great Reset. But now it's in play. Listen to this article. France is in flames. Israel is erupting. America is facing a second January 6th. In the Netherlands, however, the political establishment is reeling from an entirely different type of protest, one that, perhaps more than any other raging today, threatens to destabilize the global order. The victory of the farmer citizens movement in the recent provincial elections represents an extraordinary result for an anti-establishment party that was formed just 3 years ago. But then again, these are not ordinary times. The BBB, and by the way, I believe this political party, the BBB, I believe this could happen in America, but everybody is married to the two-party system. But the minute people who really care in Congress decide to say, neither one of you guys actually believe this, and you start to peel away, you're not going to have a third party of real meaning unless it started at the grassroots level over something like this. The BBB grew out of mass demonstrations against the Dutch government's proposal to cut nitrogen emissions by 50% in the country's farming sector by 2030, a target designed to comply with the European Union's emission reduction rules. While farming companies have the means to meet these goals by using less nitrogen fertilizer and reducing the number of their livestock, smaller, often family-owned farms would be forced to sell or to shutter. Indeed, according to a heavily redacted European Commission document, this is precisely the strategy's goal. Quote, intensifying agriculture, notably through buying out or terminating farms with the aim of reducing livestock. This would first be, still quoting, on a voluntary basis, but mandatory buyout is not excluded if necessary, end quote. It's no surprise then the plan sparked massive protests by farmers who see it as a direct attack on their livelihoods, or the BBB slogan, no farms, no food, clearly resonated with voters. But aside from concerns about the impact of the measure on the country's food security and on the century-old rural way of life that is part of the Dutch national identity, the rationale behind this drastic measure is also questionable. Agriculture currently accounts for almost half of the country's output of carbon dioxide. Yet, the Netherlands is responsible for less than 0.4% of the world's emissions. No wonder many Dutch fail to see how such a negligible return justify the complete overhaul of the country's farming sector, which is already considered one of the most sustainable in the world. Over the past 2 decades, water dependence for key crops has been reduced by as much as 90%, and the use of chemical pesticides in greenhouses have been almost completely eliminated. Farmers also point out that the consequences of the nitrogen cut would extend well beyond the Netherlands. The country, after all, is Europe's largest exporter of meat and the second largest agricultural exporter in the world, just behind the United States. And in other words, the plan would cause food exports to collapse at a time when the world is already facing food and resource shortages. We already know what this looks like. A ban on nitrogen fertilizer was conducted in Sri Lanka last year with disastrous consequences. It caused artificial food shortage, plunged nearly 2 million Sri Lankans into poverty, leading to an uprising that toppled the government. Given the irrational nature of the policy, many protesting farmers believe it can't simply be blamed on the urbanite green elites currently running the Dutch government. They suggest one of the underlying reasons for the move is to squeeze small farmers from the market, allowing them to be bought out by multinational agribusiness giants who recognize the immense value of the country's land. Not only is it highly fertile, but it is also strategically located with easy access to the North Atlantic coast, Rotterdam, largest port in Europe. They also point out that the Prime Minister is an agenda contributor of the World Economic Forum. which is well known to be corporate-driven, while the finance minister of social affairs and employment is also tied to the WEF. The struggle playing out in the Netherlands would seem to be part of a much bigger game that seeks to reset the international food system. As the second largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions after the energy sector, agriculture has naturally ended up on the crosshairs of net zero advocates, that is, virtually all major international and global organizations. The solution, we're told, is sustainable agriculture, part of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals for Agenda 2030. This issue has now been pushed to the top of the global agenda. Last November, the G20 meeting in Bali called for an accelerated transformation towards sustainable and resilient agriculture and food systems and supply chains to ensure that food systems better contribute to the adaptation and mitigation of climate change. A few days later in Egypt, COP27 annual Green Agenda Climate Summit launched its initiative aimed at promoting a shift towards sustainable, climate-resilient, healthy diets. Within a year, its Food and Agricultural Organization aims to launch a roadmap for reducing greenhouse emissions in the agricultural sector. The end game is hinted at in several other UN documents: reducing nitrogen use and global livestock production, lowering meat consumption, and promoting more sustainable source of protein, such as plant-based or lab-grown products or insects. The United Nations Environment Program, for example, has stated global meat and dairy consumption must be reduced by 50%. Other international multilateral organizations have presented their own plans for transforming the global food system. The EU's Farm to Fork strategy aims to accelerate our transition to a sustainable food system. Alongside these intergovernmental and multilateral bodies, a vast network of stakeholders is now devoting to the greening of agriculture and food production. Private foundations, public-private partnerships, NGOs, and corporations. Reset the Table, a 2020 Rockefeller Foundation report, called for moving away from focus on maximizing shareholder returns to a more equitable system focused on fair returns and benefits to all stakeholders. This may sound like a good idea until one considers that stakeholder capitalism is a concept heavily promoted by the World Economic Forum, which represents the interest of the largest and most powerful corporations on the planet. It goes on to talk about all of the things that Bill Gates is doing, all of the moves against our farmland. This is far more important than arguing with somebody today about transgenderism. These things are happening because they know it'll push every button in you, and you will be distracted and not follow things like this. And when you do start following them, that's when the cry will come out. It's a conspiracy theory. It is not.